We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
And complete the dang fence.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill.
Cast down your bucket where you are.
We come from France.
And I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants.
They're coming in by the thousands, just unbelievable.
A wall is an immorality.
Who are you rooting for? Those masters of the universe are at it again.
You maniac! You blew it up!
Welcome to Parsing Immigration Policy, the podcast of the Center for Immigration Studies. My name is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center. And today we're going to talk about the Refugee Resettlement Program with Nayla Rush, who's a senior researcher here who covers the refugee issue. And the thing here is that we're going to talk specifically about the actual refugee program. Because what's happened, this is not just under the current Biden-Harris administration, but happened even before that to some degree, that refugee kind of became a more flexible term. And under this administration, they've extended various refugee benefits and other, privileges to people who aren't really refugees, at least under the specific definition of our law. But what we want to talk about is what this administration has done with the actual U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, which is the formal name of it. It's run through the State Department, brings people here, resettles them here based on various criteria, and is something that the administration, any administration, actually has a good deal of control over, because unlike many of the Biden-Harris policies to parole large numbers of people in through various programs, which are just on their face illegal, this is actually laid out in statute. It's a lawful program, good, bad, or indifferent. They have the authority to do this, and the president, under the Refugee Act of 1980, has authority to just set the ceiling for refugees. In other words, the cap, what the limit is to be brought in, which is often dealt with or considered more like a target than a cap, unfortunately. He can set it any level he wants. Under the Trump administration, it was set kind of low. This administration has set it higher, and there's nothing stopping them except the capacity to actually bring people in. There's nothing stopping them from setting it at any number they feel like. And so this is an important tool for an administration that wants to make an end run around congressional limits on immigration. Again, this is lawful, but it's a sort of an escape hatch where they can increase immigration almost as much as they can get away with without breaking the law, as they are doing in some other programs. So Nayla's here with us in the studio, and she wrote a piece recently remaking the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program, which is highlighted on our website, cis.org. And we're going to talk about some of the high points. There's actually lots of extra specifics we're not going to be able to get to in this episode, but I wanted Nayla to come in. And if you could start with generally, what are the numbers, how have they grown, and what is the administration trying to do to increase the number of people they're bringing in?
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Well, you're right about one thing, is there is going to be an increase, and this administration has done everything, not just to change how many people are coming in and how fast the process is going to take, but to change who is coming and how. Mm-hmm. And I'll get to that later on. So they have kind of modernized the program, added resources, and hired more people so that they can bring more people faster, more refugees faster into the United States. We are now, by the end of July, the total admissions of refugees has reached around 75,000.
That's for the fiscal year, starting October 1.
October 1st until end of July. We still have a couple of months. It might go close to 90,000. The ceiling this year has been 125, which is closer to the ceiling than last year. My expectation is that now that they have modernized and strengthened this program, next year we should see at least 125,000, if not more, when they increase the ceilings.
So we don't know what the ceiling necessarily is going to be, right? The president kind of announces that.
The president announces that at the end of September of each fiscal year,
right.
And we should expect the number to be much higher next year. Not that they can. They can because they modernized the system. They have kind of digitized everything with online review of information, video teleconference interviews, etc. This leads to faster processing time. Just in short, it used to take years between when a refugee was inside the U.S. wrap until he arrived into the U.S. Now it takes a few months at most.
Yeah. So just to step back a second, the ceiling was 125,000 for last year as well, right? But they just never got close to it?
They got to half of it, and because they were still fixing this, modernizing this system. And now I believe, and they introduce another program which will talk about the private sponsorship inside the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program that will allow for more sponsors, for more people to come here under different means.
Right.
Now, you talked about the beneficiary. You have resettlement agencies here that are funded by the State Department to take care, help refugees as soon as they arrive into the U.S. for the first few months of their stay here to help them integrate.
Mm-hmm.
These work with local affiliates, obviously, within the U.S., and the local affiliates number has been added 150. So now we're up to 350 local affiliates. This helps a lot, taking care. So more people are coming. Other people who are not refugees, you mentioned other population. We can talk about Ukrainian parolees. We can talk about Afghan parolees and other asylees. These people will be helped as a refugee. The only difference, that's I always say it, and it's very important. A refugee, by law, has to apply for the green card 1 year after arrival. So they are on path to U.S. citizenship. A refugee is a durable solution. A refugee is somebody who has left his country because of persecution and has taken a refuge in a host country. Resettlement is bringing these people from their host countries to a Western country. Here we're talking about the United States. Obviously, not every refugee can be resettled. You have 30 million refugees worldwide now. Those in real need of resettlement are the ones who are prioritized to come to the U.S.
At least theoretically.
That is what I was going to say, is that the Biden-Harris administration has kind of shifted this. That's why I said they're shifting who is coming and how they are coming. They are prioritizing, for instance, LGBTQ refugees and, wanting to bring them here. Mm-hmm. Specifically, they are prioritizing, for instance, refugees/migrants from Latin America in the hope, and it was said like that, so that they don't cross here illegally and kind of make it an unlawful move, a lawful move.
Yeah, just on that, the theory is these people would be coming illegally anyway, supposedly. And so that they avoid the risk and the expense and all that, since they're going to come anyway, well, let's just let them in as refugees, and it's just better off for everybody. That's kind of the thinking, right?
That is kind of the thinking. And what they did is open what they call safe mobility centers in the region so that the migrants/refugees will go there, helped by UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and IOM, the migration one, and they will guide them through the process to come to the United States, whether through refugee resettlement or whether through parole or whether through work authorization or family. So they guide them. Okay, don't go across to the U.S. Come to us and we will help you and we will take you there.
It's almost like a recruiting office for migration that the State Department sets up in Latin America.
Remember, it reminded me of the CAM program, the Central American Minors Program, designed by President Obama, which was trying to prevent migrants, unaccompanied minors, to cross into the U.S. illegally. And what he did is also have this program to say, we will come and get you, you can apply, there were conditions, etc. I won't go into this. And we will bring you here as a refugee. But if you can't come as a refugee, if you don't qualify as a refugee, you will still be able to come here as a parolee.
Right.
So they were brought in anyway.
So this is the same kind of thing, but not just for unaccompanied minors, but for anybody.
Anybody in Latin America of any nationality. They just need to be in the region. And you talked about numbers about the ceiling of the refugee resettlement program, 125,000. They have ceilings also by region. So Latin America this year, the ceiling, the quota, if I can say that, was between 35,000 and 50,000.
That's within the 125,000.
Yeah, but
right.
From this region, they want to bring as much as that many. They brought less. I think the number was 16,000 so far, and that's a lot. Last year, just to compare, it was 15,000 of this region. So we doubled, tripled that allocation.
Right. Because just to be clear, most refugees that we resettled have traditionally been not from Latin America. They've been from Africa or Asia, the Middle East, that sort of thing. And so we're now taking more people as refugees, resettling them here from Latin America. That's a strategy or a conscious policy of this administration.
Definitely. And the numbers are growing fast, really fast from this region. And as you said, it is a priority for this Biden-Harris administration. Perhaps it's one of the root causes of migration that they are trying to fix. Let's move forward to the real change of the refugee resettlement program that this administration has done. It has allowed something called private sponsorship. So, historically, throughout the history of this program, it was mainly UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, who would refer refugees to be resettled in the U.S. Then the U.S. will consider and process them.
So in a sense, the UN gave us a list of people who weren't just refugees, but refugees that they, for whatever reason, judged needed resettlement. And then we would select from that. We didn't necessarily even take all of those, right?
That is correct. And the selection was supposed to be those people, they would know more because they are in the region, their staff is there, they know the refugees, and they would know supposedly who's in need of resettlement. I wrote about that. I had my doubts as to how it was applied, but at least we had that.
Right.
Now, this selection process has been taken away from the UN agency and given to private individuals in the United States who can come and say, I want to sponsor this refugee and bring them to the US. Meaning, remember, this refugee is a future American citizen, so it's a private individual in the US who decides who gets to come here and who gets to be an American citizen. That's a huge change from the essence of resettlement itself. So this program is called the Welcome Corps program within this refugee resettlement program.
Welcome Corps, just for listeners, as in Marine Corps, in other words, a group of people welcoming refugees. So go ahead. What's the Welcome Corps do?
The idea is that individuals here, they have to be either American citizens or with a green card, even those with a conditional green card. They come together, they form a group, 5 people. The idea is that they take the role of the resettlement agency who was here in charge of helping the refugee as they adapt to U.S. life, financially, help them integrate, etc. These individuals are going to do the job. They have to come with some $2,400. Actually, they don't have to come with the whole amount, but the application, if you want details, you can read the report. And they have to sign a code of conduct. They have to have a plan, and then they can bring a refugee here. Welcome Corps started with something called the matching phase, which is a refugee in the program that's been processed, that then is assigned, that people didn't know, that assigned to this group. It didn't really have a great success. Sponsors weren't that excited about the idea.
Because they couldn't really pick people in that initial stage. In other words, it was people already in the pipeline, And they were essentially saying, hey, do you want to sponsor this person you've never heard of before?
Exactly. And so they moved to the naming phase where you could pick your own. And this is why it's skyrocketed. And I think we have like 60,000 sponsors or more until now. So, and we should expect many. And you'd expect
Do we
people.
know what share of this year's refugees have come in through these?
That is
private
not
sponsorship?
public. That is not public. When you go to look at the numbers, as I do, you have the nationalities, you have the month admissions, state where they are resettled, but you don't have ones that come through the Welcome Corps or through the regular
Well, that's
process.
something we should FOIA probably. So,
Yeah.
Good.
That's what I told them.
So actually a question before you continue on this. The way it's always worked, like you said, the UNHCR looks at these people and basically, I mean, the first thing they say is, well, are you a refugee? Do you meet the definition of a refugee under the UN treaty, which we've incorporated into our law in the Refugee Act of 1980? In this Welcome Corps process, who decides whether that person actually is a refugee or just your brother-in-law?
The eligibility to participate in this program, the person has to have a refugee status either from UNHCR or has to have some type of documentation from the government which is hosting him. He or she doesn't need to have a refugee status by UNHCR.
I see.
However, at the end of the process, it's USCIS, it's the US government that gives the refugee
Right,
status,
that's what I mean.
and they come as a refugee.
So do we know whether USCIS is actually checking to see whether these people actually do qualify as refugees before you even get to the sponsorship part?
To apply to this program, you
Right.
have to have some sort of refugee claim.
Right.
Now, if UNHCR has not given you a refugee status despite your claim, then USCIS might.
Really? Okay, interesting. So, or if I understood correctly, let's say you're a Syrian in Turkey. Does Turkey, for instance, give some kind of ID card that would signify that you're a refugee?
Yeah, you could have an ID card from the government. Turkey is one of the countries that is not in the Welcome Corps.
Oh, interesting. Okay. In other words, people from Turkey don't qualify?
There are countries that refugees are in.
Right.
Because USCIS has to go to this country and interview the refugee. It's not a national. It is in the country. Turkey, so if you're a refugee in Turkey, you will not be able to participate in the Welcome Corps.
Because USCIS doesn't send people there?
Because of different reasons.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
One of them is interviews. And so you have a list of countries that they can't be in the Welcome Corps.
Anyway, so you had written in the report that, so the way you've described it so far is an individual, several people get together, but it doesn't just have to be people, right? In other words, there are now other parts of the Welcome Corps. You'd mentioned that on campus it can happen, and work sites it can happen. How does that work?
So the Welcome Corps expanded and keeps expanding in a way that I have a hard time following. So the idea of the Welcome Corps, that's it. And then they started with something called the Welcome Corps on campus, meaning you bring refugees directly to U.S. institutions and schools. They come not under a student visa, they come as refugees again. Right. And all is covered, and the same thing, these five sponsors have to be somehow close together. They have to be part of the institution of the university, so they are able to help the student, etc. The student has to come alone. They can't bring their family members. So it's one-on-one cases. Then they moved to something called the Welcome Corps at Work, where employers in the U.S. can check the site and see who wants to do this job, and then bring a refugee here directly to do a job. And the catch here, if I can say a catch, is that this refugee who's coming to work directly
right.
to the employer, to the U.S. as a refugee, can bring family members up to 5.
Wow, okay.
Up to 5 members.
So it's almost, this part of it is, to be perfectly honest, it's kind of a work visa program. It's not a work visa program for any anybody anywhere in the world, but there's lots of people who would qualify as refugees that employers would be happy to sponsor if they need cheap labor. I mean, in fact, even before this, there had been relationships between the resettlement groups and employers in certain like large employers, meat processors and turkey processing and that sort of thing, where they would bring refugees in to work in these. In other words, the resettlement groups would find them jobs in these factories, and the factories worked with the resettlement groups because it was a reliable supply of labor. And in fact, I remember reading that the Muslim refugees were often sent to like turkey processing plants because there was no pork involved, and that others would go to pork or beef processing. And so, in a sense, this formalizes what used to be a kind of informal relationship, a kind of pipeline, refugee pipeline into sweatshops in the United States.
And so they expanded even more. And they have now the Welcome Corps for Afghans.
Oh, wow. Okay. For new Afghans or just the ones who are already here? This is to bring in new people.
The Welcome Corps is for people here to sponsor Afghans.
No, that's what I mean. Yeah. In other words, not to deal with the parolees here, but to actually...
No, it's a refugee. It's under the refugee. It's for Afghans, and the Afghans have been given a priority 2 appellation, which is kind of a group membership. If you're Afghan, you get the priority 2. It's priority 1 is one-on-one individual, any
where
individual.
You actually qualify as a refugee yourself, right?
Yeah, and then it's a group appellation, like you can do Syrians, you can do Afghans, so they are in the priority 2. Priority 3 is the family reunification, what they call it, if you have family. But anyway, now with the Welcome Corps, which is the priority 4, you can also have this for Afghans. So they did it
and so
both
that's
ways.
New, though, this year, right?
This is new.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm saying that they are expanding a lot.
I'd like to see what they're going to do next. If you got Welcome Corps in campus, Welcome Corps at work, I don't know what will be next. I don't know. Let's see. Welcome Corps in football teams or something. Anyway, the other thing that I really wanted to get to was something that hasn't happened but might, and this is the issue of Gaza refugees, because that was an issue a while ago where there was pressure from some Democrats in Congress and officials outside the government to bring in refugees from Gaza. And the administration, even this administration, thought that was a bridge too far, so it didn't happen. But it seems to me it's the kind of thing that we could end up seeing if the Harris is reelected and we have a Harris-Walz administration.
That is a big possibility, I would say, because like I've been talking and like you said, they have the authority. They can prioritize any group, any nationality as they want. They can have these pathways and open a pathway. And the refugee resettlement program is an easy pathway. It's a durable pathway. These refugees will come here from Gaza, or refugees from Gaza, even if they had fled to other Arab countries, will be able to come here and become American citizens. And with what we saw on U.S. campuses, that is, I think, why it was an idea that even the Biden administration, I think he stopped it. With Harris, especially if we have peace in the Middle East, I wouldn't be surprised if we had this kind of opportunity for refugees from Gaza. We skipped this one, but that's another expansion of the Welcome Corps is the Welcome Corps for refugees in Latin America.
Oh, that's its own Welcome Corps?
So it has its own Welcome Corps, so people from there, and it's really complicated but simple. Their idea is you apply for 1 or 2 immigration policy, a program that you want. The one that is accepted, you come. So you have, remember they had the process for the CHNV,
right.
NV, sorry. And that was now stopped because of fraud.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you apply to this to come under parole, you can still apply, you can still be sponsored to come to the U.S. as a refugee under the Welcome Corps for Latin America. The one that you accepted first, you will come under.
Yeah, interesting. So you throw everything up against the wall and see what sticks, as they
So remember, this is also part of the prioritizing refugees from Latin America. They increased the numbers, they increased the allocation, regional allocation, and they're opening up all these avenues for refugees from Latin America.
Interesting. So there's I mean, they could just as easily start Welcome Corps for Gaza, right? I mean, there's nothing stopping them. This is all made up.
exactly, and you'll probably have many sponsors
especially on campus.
Volunteering.
They may not even need to do that. Just welcome Corps on campus. What we saw, the pro-Hamas protests on campus, they could easily find 5 people to sponsor
now,
refugees.
remember that all these, any nationality can come under the Welcome Corps. Any nationality can come as a refugee under the Refugee Resettlement Program. When you have some for one nationality a program, you design it specifically for this nationality, is to increase specifically the numbers of these people and bring them here, which they have done, and they might do it if Harris wins the presidency for Gazans.
Right.
And remember that this Welcome Corps program that is being portrayed as private, but it does rely on federal funds a lot, if not mostly. So you can go to my report and see the details how they do it, because it is really designed in a way that kind of you get lost a little bit.
But basically, I mean, they're calling it private sponsorship, but you should put scare quotes around private, because it's private individuals or companies or schools doing it, but much of the expense is funded by federal grants, is basically your point here.
It is my point. And then remember that all these refugees, but not just the refugees, as we said, they open up the eligibility for other populations, including parolees. So all these people have access to federal funds as benefits, as access to state and local funds. And so in the 2,400 that sponsor groups would come up with is the one that the State Department was giving the Refugee Resettlement Agency by one refugee, for one refugee.
Oh, I see.
This
so that
doesn't go far.
$2,400 was what they're paying per head, and that's still the amount they're paying for
It was
refugee
increased.
resettlement?
It was increased. It was 2,200 last year. It's now
Right.
2,445 or something like that. So in the end, the refugee here, even if they will become self-sufficient fast, they do try and find them jobs, etc. But they do have access to all these federal benefits and programs that we have.
Right.
Last point I want to make, Mark, and that is, I think the design of this program was to break the geographic limitation of resettlement, because before, for a refugee to be held by a refugee resettlement agency or the local affiliate, they needed to be there. They needed to have translator, an office in the state that would receive them.
Right.
So not every state could reach.
Oh, yeah. Notably, I mean, just Wyoming has no refugee office or anything like that.
Yes, they had to have, I think the distance even, it's written what distance they needed to have a local affiliate.
Interesting.
Now, with the being a private sponsorship, and they are very happy now with the success of this program, because they have sponsors of all 50 states.
Interesting. And so, yeah, in a sense, they're subcontracting to even more subcontractors. In other words, the 10 big, what they used to call VOLAGs, the resettlement groups, like you say, have, 300 now?
350.
350 subcontractors, kind of organizations, local Catholic charities or whatever it is. But in a sense, with this so-called private sponsorship, they now have potentially millions of subcontractors, if you will.
The fact is that the private sponsorship group can be anywhere, and then they are helped or assisted from afar, but they can be anywhere. So they have broken the geographic limit. That was kind of a limitation. They had to have some kind of group helping them, and that is open now to the end. And remember that the refugee, whenever they go to any state, are free to leave the state, are free to leave the group, are free to leave the PSG. And actually, in the code of conduct, the group who is sponsoring has to accept the fact that the refugee can come, refuse any help from them, and leave. So in the end, there's no accountability and there's no follow-up on how are we helping and integrating and helping a refugee.
And the accountability is important too, because, what penalty is there if this so-called private sponsorship group you're talking about, like at least 5 people who have to vouch for or be a sponsor, if they don't even do their minimal responsibilities, and it's actually very minimal here, there's no punishment. Nothing happens to them, right?
Well, they will not be able to sponsor again.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, they're not.
That is the punishment.
They're not going to be sued. They're not going
to.
to. They're not going to jail or anything like that.
No, and that is also the risk of such programs. That there is no way, even if they wanted, the State Department wanted to follow up and talk to sponsor and see what they were doing. There's no way you can keep track of so many.
Right.
And the more numbers, the more sponsors, the more perhaps chaos.
And fraud. I mean, not to get on the subject of last week's show, but the reason that CHNV program was halted, we talked about that last week with Arthur, was precisely because of fraud in the sponsorship end of that program. So this is the kind of thing where the Welcome Corps goes for another few months or another year, and we're going to have information about fraud in that sponsorship program, I would expect. I mean, I don't see how it's going to be avoided.
What you're going to see is more people, Afghans here, sponsoring Afghans here.
Right.
Somalis sponsoring Somalis here. Already in Minnesota, which is known to having the large group of Somalis,
right,
mostly who came as refugees and now are American citizens, are in Minnesota because of family reunification, probably through the program of refugee resettlement. Now imagine these can act as private sponsors. Remember, to be a sponsor, you need to have a green card. A green card holder who is a new refugee can now sponsor those to follow.
The next refugee, right.
I looked at the number of Minnesota of Somalis who've arrived. It was over 1,000. And the whole U.S.
That was for this fiscal year?
This fiscal year, October to end of July. And the whole U.S. resettlement was over 3,500.
Of Somalis.
Of Somalis. That is a lot.
Right.
So when you open up, I'm expecting next year will be more. So you'll have more groups bringing their family members, their friends, their neighbors, and you might have some.
So it's, instead of regular chain migration, it's chain refugee resettlement is basically what we're talking about.
And the fact is, by bringing these people here, I don't have a problem with private citizens helping refugees adapt, taking them to church or taking them to school or helping them with how to take the metro. That's a great idea. It's the selection process and the money behind it that I have a problem with.
Yeah, so in other words, instead of the American people basically through their employees selecting who's going to come here, it's individual people, some of whom aren't even Americans yet. They could just have green cards.
Yeah.
Deciding who tomorrow's American citizens are going to be.
And who is left behind, because we rarely talk about who's left behind. You have millions really in need of resettlement, and are those we're bringing really needing to come to the U.S.? Were they in danger where they were, or are they just coming? Because now somebody here can sponsor them and say, hey, come and join me. You can become an American citizen.
So it's kind of blurring the distinction between refugee resettlement and just regular immigration.
Exactly. And now you come to go to work or to go to school or to go to stay with a family member. The whole essence of the refugee resettlement was changed by the Biden-Harris administration. It is not a life-saving program anymore. It has become perhaps an immigration program, another pathway that they designed for people to bring here.
Interesting. Well, on that note, we'll finish for this week's show. Thank you, Nayla Rush. Her report is on the website, Remaking the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program. There's actually more to it even than we got to, at least more details. And Nayla's written about a number of other aspects of this in earlier reports. This is something that you're going to see action and news coverage on this, really, regardless of how the election goes, because I expect if Trump is elected, there are going to be attempts to discontinue a lot of this. And in fact, under Trump, the number of refugees being resettled went way down. But if Vice President Harris is reelected, she's going to continue her administration's approach. And I expect you're going to see refugee resettlement increasingly become kind of put scare quotes around refugee, because it's just going to be another excuse for regular immigration, as you said, whether it's work-related, family-related, whatever it is, rather than the kind of specific targeted humanitarian program, which is what refugee resettlement was supposed to be all along. So thank you, Nayla, for coming in, and we're definitely going to have you back. You keep an eye on this.
The Welcome Corps report will be out soon. It'll have all these expansion of the Welcome Corps with the campuses and
More
the details
on it. Yeah, good.
And so look out for that one.
We'll look for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, my 2 cents on Vice President Kamala Harris's pivot, as the New York Times puts it, on immigration. Look, politicians change views and dissemble all the time. Anybody who thought Trump was opposed to abortion or that Barack Obama was against gay marriage was naive. But what we're seeing from Vice President Harris now that she's the presidential candidate on a whole bunch of issues, but immigration is the most notable, is a level of falsehood and deception that can only be described as sociopathic. The vice president was, in fact, the border czar. And in fact, even by the standards of the administration's assessment of what their policy was, she was de facto border czar. Because even though she and her defenders in the media protest that she was only assigned to deal with the root causes of migration from Central America, which, by the way, she's totally failed at. But that was the entirety of the administration's immigration policy. As our own Art Arthur has written, since DHS Secretary Mayorkas explicitly said that they were not making any effort, that they renounced the use of deterrence to stop illegal immigration. In other words, the point being they wouldn't detain people. They did nothing to try to deter illegal immigration. The root causes side of it, which was explicitly part of the vice president's portfolio, was the entirety of the administration's approach to limiting immigration. So even by their own definition, she was border czar. And now the vice president's campaign, even though she's said nothing about this herself, has denied all the positions she had before on immigration. She explicitly was in favor of decriminalizing border crossing, giving Medicaid to illegal immigrants, ending all private detention facilities. As Attorney General or as a district attorney in San Francisco, she had obviously carried out vigorously the cities and counties' sanctuary policy. She explicitly wrote a recommendation for an illegal alien to be admitted to the California bar. So there is a real record there, like her running mate, Governor Walz from Minnesota, signed a bill giving driver licenses to illegal aliens. So there's a whole track record there that the campaign is trying to run away from. And an ad that she released on immigration showing how she was going to be tough and tougher than President Trump touted her support for the Lankford bill. This is the bill that supposedly is the toughest enforcement bill in American history or whatever, and specifically saying that it would have hired thousands more agents. But as we've noted over and over again, without a change in policy, more Border Patrol agents actually means more illegal immigration, ironically, because they would simply be processing illegal immigrants more rapidly into the United States. So the center doesn't recommend people vote one way or the other in any kind of election. People have a lot of different views they're interested in, and we even here probably have people whose votes you would not be able to predict. But the fact is that campaigns should be based on facts, and then positions that people take should be based on those facts. And unfortunately, the vice president seems to be running away from her actual record. She is the incumbent. She's responsible for the policies of her administration, and putting forth and making promises about being tougher on the border that are implausible at best. So again, vote for whoever you want. There's months left in this campaign, but there's a real lost opportunity here to have a debate about what immigration policy should be. How many people should we let in, and how do we enforce those rules? And instead, we're getting lots of smoke and mirrors and falsehoods. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Parsing Immigration Policy. If you have any complaints or compliments, story ideas for future shows, email us at center@cis.org. And if the platform you get this podcast on allows you to rate or review the podcast, please do that because it raises the visibility of it. And there's thousands of podcasts, and anything we can do to stand up out of the crowd is useful. So until next time, this is Mark Krikorian signing off.